top, a sewing pattern by Sew Girl. A-line trapeze shape with a V-neck detail with lacing. This has got fluted sleeves with a very deep hem, and it's suitable for drapey fabrics such as viscose, tencel or lightweight linen. It's an easy project and it's in sizes 8 to 30. So first of all, we're going to cut out all our pieces. You can see here that I'm using some rather nice viscose fabric, which I found from Sew Me Sunshine. And because it's a little bit slippery, I'm using small scissor action, little snips, just to keep the fabric stable. And I've weighed my pattern pieces down with weights rather than pin it. Now you could also use a rotary cutter to cut around it, but bear in mind you will need a mat for this underneath. When it comes to the sleeve head, just be careful when you're cutting around a curved edge. It's not as easy as a straight. And when you come to the sleeve head, you need to notch into the top shoulder section, which is represented by a single notch, and also the front, again, another single notch, and 2 notches at the back section. You will also need to make a notch at the bottom edge, and this is when we're lining up with the cuff facing. Remove your weights or your pins and take your pattern piece off, and then we're going to cut out all the other pieces. So you should have one front piece, one back piece, a couple of sleeves, and all your facing pieces, tie and your loop tabs. So now we're coming onto the shoestring tie and the tabs, the loop tabs. You can see that I folded my piece of fabric over, my strip, in half, matching the raw edges, and then I'm sewing along the raw edges so that I've got a 1/4 inch tube or 5mm width tube. Sometimes I like to sew it twice just to get nice and close. I leave a long thread end and I trim down my seam allowance. Just trim the seam allowance in half. Now leave your long thread end on one side, but trim off your your thread ends on the other side. Tie your long thread ends onto a needle. Now you want a needle that's got a blunted end so that you can pass it through the tube easily, and tie a really good knot. Now you could use a loop turner to do this instead, but I'm just showing you a method with a needle just in case you haven't got one. Trim down your little point at your end of your tube and then pass the needle through and out the other end. You will need to tease your end at the far end, just literally pull it over, get it going with your fingernails, and then you'll feel it go all of a sudden, and then you can just pull it gently, pull the threads ends gently until you can feel it turning inside out. And there you have your piece for your loop tabs, which you're going to cut into 6 pieces measuring 2 inches long, and you're going to do a longer piece for your shoestring tie. Here you can see I've cut small pieces of quilting tape and I've stuck them to the edge of the facing. Then I've placed my loop tabs and clipped them on just to hold them in place. And then I've stitched them along the neck facing edge just to hold the tabs in place. Next we join the front facing and the back facing together at the short edges, sew them and then press the seam allowances open. Next we're going to fold over and press all around the outer edge of the facing, just a very small fold of about 5 millimeters or 1/4 of an inch. So we're going to pin together the shoulder edges after having stay stitched around the V-neck and the back neck edge. So we're going to sew them together. Then we're going to finish the raw edge and press the seam allowances towards the back. Then we top stitch on the right side along the shoulder seams. Here we have the neck facing that's attached to the neck edge. I've pinned it on, and then we're going to hand tack it all the way around. After hand tacking all the way around the neck edge, we're going to then go back to the sewing machine and sew all the way around the neck edge. When you've finished sewing all the way around, you're going to remove all your tacking stitches. And next we're going to clip into our seam allowance at the curved sections and also reduce down the bulk at the side seams, at the shoulder seams. Nick either side of the seam, cross seam, and then reduce down to about half the width. And then we're going to clip into the seam allowance along the front edge, neck edge. This just helps it sit flat because it's on a curve, It's on a slight curve, it just needs that extra rim. And then cut into the point of the V at the seam allowance and trim any excess tab ends that you might have. Now we're going to press that facing upwards away from the top with the seam allowance towards the facing on the reverse side, and then we're going to understitch all the way around, and this is a line of stitching close to the seam line just to keep that seam allowance in place. Next we're going to fold the facing to the reverse side and pin it, or if you want to and you have any, you could use little pieces of Wonder Web that you can iron on just to keep the facing in place, and it just means you don't need to use any pins. Here I'm showing you both methods, but either are good. If you pin it, you might not need to hand tack it in place, but if you use pieces of Wonder Web, you won't need to do that. And then we're going to sew around the outer edge of the facing on the machine using a slightly longer stitch length. So now we're going to pin the sides together below the armhole, from the armhole to the lower edge. Match up the raw edges together. I like to pin at the two further points, two further ends, and then pin in the middle and then pin in between. And then we're going to sew all the way down the sides and do the same for both sides. Here we have one finished, and you see I've overlocked the edge as well and given it a really good press on both sides. So onto the sleeves now. The cuff facing piece I've folded over on the unnotched side, a 1 centimetre fold, and then on the notched side we match that up to the sleeve edge. So match at the far ends and match up the notch in the centre. Pin it all the way along, and then we're going to sew it on the machine, just along the long edge, not the short edge. This cuff facing piece, it's going to be eventually folded to the back of the fabric, so you won't see it. So it's possible that you could do this in a different fabric if you wanted to. So here I have it stitched on. I've pressed it open and I've pressed the seam allowance open as well. I've still got the folded edge, but I'm just going to slightly open it up because I'm going to pin the side of the sleeve together. So I've folded the sleeve in half, matched up the raw edges, and I'm going to sew down the long edge at the side. So the sleeve has been sewn up now and the raw edges have been finished, and now I'm folding over the cuff facing edge over to the reverse side and I'm pinning. It's a good idea to work on the ironing board here, and you can press it as you go. So the edge of the facing is still folded under, and I'm pinning at that folded edge. So here's one that I finished, and you can see the line of stitching at the inner folded edge, and we're now moving on to the sleeves. So you need to locate the back and front section of each sleeve head, turn the sleeve the right side out, and match up the underarm sleeves, cross seams, and make sure that the back section of the sleeve head matches up to the back of the top, and the back section on the sleeve head is marked by 2 notches. Pin at the cross seams at the underarm section, pin at the top notch and match that up to the shoulder seam, and then ease your sleeve head around by pinning it all in. You might need to just stretch it out slightly as you go, but it should match up perfectly. So with the sleeve head pinned in all the way around, we're now going to sew on the machine, starting at the underarm seam allowance and removing the pins as you go, and then finish the raw edge with an overlocker or a zigzag stitch. Finally, we're going to turn under the hem and stitch all the way around. I like to finish it first with an overlocker, but you don't have to do that. And then thread your shoestring tie onto a safety pin and use that safety pin to thread it through the loop tabs. Makes it a lot easier. And then as a final touch, you might want to tie a knot in the ends of your shoestring ties, or even add a nice chunky bead or a couple of beads onto the end, just as a little fine finishing touch. So there you have your lovely Nina top, all ready for your summer holiday, and super to wear with palazzo pants or long skirt. Thanks for watching.